Assalamualaikum. My name is Nurusnisa binti Abdul Rashid. Today I will present about the Sharia contract of Ijarah. First is introduction. The definition of Ijarah is an alternative to conventional lease contracts. Islam has allowed Ijarah contracts to fulfill the different needs of the people. Sometimes people want to use and take benefits from an asset, but they are not able to own the asset or might not be interested owning it due to many reasons. The contract with Ijarah gives them the luxury of getting the right of use without taking ownership of an asset. Literally, Ijarah means compensation, consideration, and return. Technically, it refers to a contract for hiring or renting an asset or commodity to get benefits from its use. In other words, Ijarah is the sale of a product or services in return for compensation. Next is types of Ijarah. There are two types of Ijarah. First is based on subject matter of the lease asset. First, Ijarah Ain. Ijarah Ain is to lease the usufruct from the specific goods or asset. It comprises all tangible assets. Examples: property, transport, and facilities. Next is Ijarah Amal. Ijarah Amal is function to list out the works or self skills. There are two types of workers. First is employee. Employee is a person that works only for interest of a particular employer and independent contractor. It does not have the right to work for any other lessee during contract. Next is independent contractor. It offers services to the general public. For example, consultant, lawyer, or contractor. The third one is Ijarah Mawsufah fi al-Zimmah. Ijarah Mawsufah fi al-Zimmah is form of Ijarah where assets need to be described in advance. The leased asset is not available during the contract. The asset must be delivered on a future agreed date, and there's no requirement should be imposed for the rental payment to be paid in advance. For the second type of Ijarah is based on the contractual relationships. First is operating lease. Operating lease is original form of Ijarah Ain. The features of an operating lease is asset acquisition. Asset acquisition is in full ownership of the lessor, legal and beneficial ownership. Responsibility to maintain is borne by the lessor and administrative affairs and maintenance of the asset. The lessee is only responsible for maintenance, due usage, and has to pay rent for agreed. Risk on the asset, the liability and the responsibility of the lessor, and high risk in nature. Second is financial lease. Financial lease normally used and offered by Islamic banks as financial intermediaries to obtaining the desired asset and obtaining cash money for various purposes. Known as Al-Ijarah Summa Al-Bay, Al-Ijarah wa Al-Iqtina or Al-Ijarah Muntahiya bi Al-Tamlik. Next is evidence. Evidence of Ijarah can be seen under Al-Quran, where one of the two daughters suggested, "Oh my dear dad, hire him. The best man for employment is definitely the strong and trustworthy one." While in Al-Quran also, it stated that, "Indeed, I wish to wed you one of these, my two daughters, on that you serve me for 8 years. But if you complete 10, it will be as a favor from you. And I do not wish to put you in difficulty. You will find me, if Allah wills, from among the righteous." It is further explained in Hadith, where give a servant his fee before his sweat dries up. Al-Bayhaqi. Next is Ijma. It states that the Ummah had come to a consensus during the time of companions and permissibility of ujrah since the need of people for usufruct is similar to their need for physical good. There are two different opinions. Some jurists, including Hassan al-Basri and al-Nahrawani and others, believe that the contract of Ijarah should be forbidden. It is because Ijarah is the sale of usufructs or service, and services is something intangible and does not exist at the time of contract. It can be achieved gradually over a maintained period, and something that does not exist cannot be sold. It is not permissible to associate bay and we call trade with something that could be realized and achieved in the future. However, the majority of jurists, including Ibn Rushd, allow contracts of Ijarah, even though usufruct does not exist at the same time of contract. Normally, it could be realized or achieved. This type of usufruct or benefit could ordinarily be accomplished or its accomplishment or non-accomplishment is rather similar.
Contracts or wages. Mujir is a person who gives wages or rents out. Mustajir is a person who receives wages to do a job or who rents something. Mujir and mustajir are required to be mature, reasonable, capable of tasharruf, like management of wealth, and mutual pleasure. Because if they are forced to enter into a contract, then the contract is not valid. As a basis there is in the word of God, "O you who believe, do not eat each other well in a variety way except through a commerce that is consensual." Second is sighah. Sighah is the constant ijab and qabul between mujir and mustajir. The sighah of the Ijarah contract must be in the form of a statement, will and intention from both parties who perform the contract. Third, ujrah. It is required to know the nominal amount by both parties, both in terms of rent or wages. And lastly, benefits, also known as ma'jur. Namely, to hire a mustajir must determine the form of work, time, wages, and energy. The type of work must be explained so as not to become obscure because transactions that are vague in a nature are legal facet. Next is conditions of pillars. Conditions are something that must exist in the form of something but are not included in the forming elements. So the first condition is the conditions for property. There is 10 elements in that conditions. First is the property must belong to the lessor. The property is known to both parties and specific. The property can be acquired by the lessor for his use until the end of tenancy or lease. Next, the property should be in a good condition possible for leasing. It is the liability of the lessor to repair damage of the property in order to make it possible for leasing. 6. It is the liability of the lessee to ensure the cleanliness and safety of the property. 7. The liability of the lease over the property is under the concept of trust, like wadiyah yad amanah. However, in the case of damage due to his negligence, the lease is liable to pay the compensation, also known as daman. 8. is the sale of a leased property is legitimate. However, the lease has a right to use the property until the lease contract has expired, where the property will then be submitted to the buyer. And lastly, the concept of al-wadiyah is applied when the lease contract has expired and the lease is still holding the property. Second is the conditions for usufruct. First is the use of the service can be valued with money. Second, the usufruct must be valid according to Islamic commercial law. Third, the lease should be able to make use of the property on lease. Fourth, the usage of the property should be made clear in order to avoid any argument. Fifth, the usufruct does not entitle the lease to own the property. Sixth, the lease is not obligated to inform the leaser his intention for using the property, except in the case of possible destruction. And last is the usufruct of property beyond its normal usage is considered as an act of intention. Third is the conditions for payment. There is 5 elements in that conditions. First is the amount of payment of rent must be known. If the payment is not in the form of cash money, the goods in return money specify its quantity, types, and its characteristic. Second, the payment of rent can be made in advance. Third, if the condition for payment is not prescribed to be paid in advance, the payment begins with when usufruct starts. Fourth, if the payment is made on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis, the payment should be made at the end of the period unless otherwise stated in the agreement. And lastly, if the property cannot be used, the payment is not obligated upon the law. And lastly, the conditions for sale. The contract of offer and acceptance should follow all the conditions of the contract of sale in Islam. For example, it should be on mutual acceptance, cannot be made in form of promises or an order, and the offer and acceptance should be the same. Okay, so now let's move to the modus operandi. As you can see, there are 7 steps that illustrate the modus operandi of Ijarah in Islamic finance. So first step is the client selects the assets and approach the supplier to acquire all the relevant information. Second, the client approach the bank to list the tenanted asset after the bank's purchase. Third, the bank purchases the asset and makes the payment on a cash basis. Fourth, the vendor transfers ownership of the asset to the bank. Fifth, the bank lists the asset to the customer by transferring possession and right of use of the asset. And sixth, the customer pays Ijarah rentals over the lease period. And lastly, at the end of the lease terms of A, the asset reverts to the bank if it is an operating lease, or B, the legal ownership is transferred to the customer if it is a finance lease. Next, for pillars of Ijarah. Pillars are elements that make up the form of something. So there are 4 elements of pillars. First is a mujir and mustajir, namely people who make rental contracts or wages. Mujir is a person who gives wages or rents out. Mustajir is a person who receives wages to do a job or who rents something. Mujir and mustajir are required to be mature, reasonable, capable of tasharruf, like management of wealth and mutual pleasure, because if they are forced to enter into a contract, then the contract is not valid. As a basis there is in the word of God, "O you who believe, do not eat each other well in a variety way except through a commerce that is consensual." Second is sigah. Sigah is the consent ijab and qabul between mujir and mustajir. The sigah of the Ijarah contract must be in the form of a statement, will, and intention from both parties who perform the contract. Third, ujrah. It is required to know the nominal amount by both parties, both in terms of rent or wages. And lastly, benefits, also known as ma'jur. Namely, to hire a mustajir must determine the form of work, time, wages, and energy. The type of work must be explained so as not to become obscure, because transactions that are vague in a nature are legal facet. We are almost in the end of the content, which is conclusion and recommendations. For conclusion, Ijarah is a binding contract that is concluded through offer and acceptance. The duration of an Ijarah contract must be specific at the time of the contract. It is necessary that the asset be delivered at the time of the contract. However, if it is delivered at a later date, then no rent is due for the period between the contract date and the actual delivery of the asset. Ijarah contracts may be executed in respect of the same assets for different periods for several leases, like successive leases. A lease may invite a co-lease to share with him the use of which he has a right.
Next is recommendation. Ijarah is an Islamic finance concept where a financial institution leases an asset to a client for a specific period at an agreed upon rental price. There are a few recommendations related to Ijarah. First is understanding Sharia compliance. Before engaging in any Ijarah transaction, it's crucial to understand the principles of Sharia compliance that govern Islamic finance. It ensures the Ijarah contract adheres to these principles to avoid any potential conflicts. Next is due diligence. Conduct through due diligence on the asset being leased and the terms of Ijarah agreement. This includes assessing the condition of the asset, its market value and the terms of the lease, such as rental payments, duration and responsibilities of both parties. Next, legal assistance. Seek legal assistance from experts well versed in Islamic finance and local laws governing leasing agreements. This ensures that the Ijarah contract is legally sound and provides protection for both parties in case of disputes. Next, also risk management. Assess and manage risks associated with Ijarah transactions. This may include risks related to asset ownership, maintenance, and insurance. Implement risk mitigation strategies to minimize potential losses. Next, transparency and communication. Maintain transparency and open communication throughout the Ijarah transaction process. Both parties should clearly understand their rights, obligations, and expectations to avoid misunderstandings and conflicts. Next, professional advice. Consider seeking advice from financial advisors or consultants specializing in Islamic finance. They can provide valuable insights and guidance tailored to your specific needs and circumstances. Last but not least is review and adaptation. Regularly review the performance of Ijarah agreements and be willing to adapt them based on changing circumstances, market conditions, and regulatory requirements. So that's all from me. Thank you.